Daigle. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
Well, I've told you this before, but your episode remains one of the highest listened to episodes on the Positively Joy podcast. And I think that was because of the uniqueness of the story, but also the fact that it's dealing with a topic that we are now talking more about. We're beginning to talk more about relationships and to women who are trying to find joy in the midst of really difficult situations in relationships. So I'm having you back on the show. In fact, you are the first guest in this new format. And so thank you so much for being that first guest because your story was so interesting. And I know you even want to go deeper this time around about the fact that women are sometimes suffering in the midst of relationships, in the midst of marriages that have gone awry in some way, and we will talk about that, or who are going through separation and having to make the difficult decision about separation and or divorce. And then after that, sometimes that can feel like a real loss and getting back into your life and trying to find that joy. And of course, on this show, we always talk about the fact that joy is not a feeling, it's faith. So we are talking about the joy that the Lord Jesus gives us. And sometimes it's hard to find. We're in the midst of that. But
Exactly.
anyway, we're gonna talk all about that today and get into some things. And so again, Sara, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about you, and then we will talk about your testimony.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I love talking with you, even just over the phone. You're a bright spot for me. So I'm excited to chat with you tonight. Um, so I was one of 10 children in an Amish community. So I grew up with a horse and a buggy and no electricity. For a while, we were very poor. And so rigorous. We would drive our horse and buggy to school as young kids for like 45 minutes in 10-degree weather without, the warm snow pants and the snow hats and everything that, one might expect you would have. So it was rigorous, but it was good. For a kid, it was good. Just that tightly knit community. So that's the basics. So go from that to now I'm a single mom with 4 kids living in North Carolina. And I think the middle of that story is what you want to touch on. So I'll leave that to you to start us on that. It's a lot.
Okay, and I'm just trying to adjust my camera just a little bit. Sometimes when you wear glasses, you get some glare, and I'm
Hmm.
just trying to not to glare out everybody. I may not be able to do it.
You look
So,
good. Yeah,
oh,
your
thank
lighting is,
you.
I think, much better than mine tonight.
No, well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for saying that. Yeah, I do enjoy speaking with you as well. I love these conversations. And I will tell you, so now that we're pivoting just a little bit more about the show, now that we're pivoting a little bit, the format's changing a little bit. I am doing more speaking. But I
Mhm.
could not get rid of my guests because I love the conversation with you and you're one of my favorites. And so, yeah, so I'm glad it's mutual.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so your story is different than a lot of people's stories here in the United States. Obviously, there are Amish communities, there are Hutterite communities, Mennonite communities in certain areas, but for the most part, and for I think the majority probably of people who watch or listen to this, it's not an experience they have had, and so that's going to be different from them. But the part about your story that is also is so interesting, but maybe there's some relevance or it will resonate with people is the patriarchal standard that you had, and which was of course when you were a child, but also into the marriage and being obedient. And yes, the Bible says that wives need to be obedient, but we are also supposed to be creatures that are loved. and
Mhm.
not, and not taken advantage of. And so that part of your story, which you're going to dig into here in a minute, I think people can relate to, even if they're not Amish. I mean, you had a husband that asked you to do some things that you simply did not agree with, and that I would argue are not biblical. And I want to talk a little bit about that later because my husband and I got into a conversation tonight about whether or not there's examples of polygamy in the Bible. And I said, surely not. And he said, well, what about Solomon? And what about, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, okay, I am definitely not a Bible scholar, but so anyway, we had a conversation. Not that he's asking me for that. Don't, not at
I
all.
wouldn't
But
think so.
let's just be clear. But
Yeah.
it is interesting. And so let's talk a little bit about your marriage and what happened kind of in the midst of that. And then also the fact that you were a mom at the time,
Mhm.
a mom of girls, which is another thing. They're watching you. They are looking at what you're doing, as all children do with their mom. So talk about the complications and the difficulties.
Okay. Um, it's a lot. I guess I'll just be super authentic here. I was pregnant with our fourth child. He's 13 now. And I was a very subservient, submissive wife. Um, Married to a type A man. I was pregnant with our fourth child when I knew I had to ask him about pornography. And that was just the start of the mental difficulty for me to try to wrap my head around what was going on. But he told me that I shouldn't have asked him about it because he couldn't lie to me, and that he had been looking at porn to see if it was okay for a godly husband to be into other women, so that was just the start. But what I really want to talk to ladies about here is the difficulty that happens in our mind when we discover something is going on in our marriage that is highly distressing and has the potential to wreck our relationship. So I wouldn't say that my husband and I had a friendship marriage, which I believe is the goal. When you have a friendship marriage, the hierarchy in a marriage doesn't really need to be there. Yes, there needs to be a godly leader and, all of that. I still believe in First Peter 3 and Titus 2 and all of those beautiful Proverbs 31. There's so much talking about godly women in the Bible that I wholeheartedly embrace and really love, even as a single woman. But here, I was had never cultivated my mind because of how I was raised. Basically, in the Amish world, the more quiet and submissive you are, the better of a woman you are. If you have too many opinions and you state too many opinions, you're kind of looked down on as one of the less exemplary women in the community. And so, on top of that, if you were to study the scriptures with an open mind and reach a different conclusion than your father or the preachers in the church who literally tell you how you have to live, then that just creates a whole dynamic of problems to where you might even be kicked out of the church, or you'd be really looked down on at the very least. And so there's never really a reason for a woman to cultivate her mind. You can be taught to study scripture and you can want to study scripture, but subconsciously you're like, all I have to do is submit. All I have to do is submit. And so you never really activate that part of your brain. So what happens is you have girls growing up and they can't speak out against, sexual abuse. They can't pick the restaurant they want to eat at. They don't know. They are raised and told that they are here for man, created for man, and their job is to be obedient and serve him, which translates into a lot of hierarchy and very selfish men and very oppressed, I say brainless women. So I was under a lot of that. And then married he was a preacher. I wanted to marry a man of God. I wanted to do ministry with him, and he was preaching at 17. I was so impressed. But from there, he was not from my background. He had come in from the outside, which I was intrigued by. I wanted something different. I wanted my world to broaden, my horizons to be wider than they were. And um, so we got married. But as soon as we got married, we left the Mennonite community, and that was my first step out into a different culture. And I was 23 and pregnant at the time.
Let me just ask you, is it unusual for someone, and you classified it as someone from the outside coming into the Amish community? Is that unusual?
By then we were in a Mennonite community, so not as unusual there. Amish, yes, very. But we had switched over to a Mennonite lifestyle, which
Hmm.
was much less oppressive and much more open-minded to other Christians, which is why my dad, I have a ton of respect for my dad. He made that choice for our family to get us out of some of that oppressive legalistic boxed in lifestyle. So that was a big, brave move for my dad. And he lost all his friends overnight over that.
Hmm.
So then, because of his stance of accepting more believers, then we had people coming in from the outside. They're like, these people are homeschooling. They're not, you know, filling their kids' minds with Hollywood. And so we had a lot of people come in, which was cool. It was interesting.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, go right ahead. You left that community when you were right after the marriage.
Yeah, and I just remember I my ex-husband had told me that he doesn't think I'm saved. He doesn't think I know the Lord because he saw the lack of faith. I was very works minded, trying to earn my salvation through works, and I didn't really know how to rest my soul in the love of God, right?
That's what he told you.
He told me he didn't think I'd ever been saved.
Mm.
And so what I tried to do then was to become saved and have just the right kind of faith. So even my faith was turning into a work, right? So I was going through all of that on a personal level. On a family level, he was telling me that my family's not good for me, that I
Mm.
was raised in kind of a cultish atmosphere. And so I was sorting through a lot. And in the middle of that, we moved from Michigan to Washington State with two kids, um, and just started life over completely in a college town. And that was the first time I took my head covering off. And I remember feeling totally naked with my hair out. It was long, down to my waist. And I was just like, because I was always taught to cover it. I remember, as a teenage girl, if a guy from church came to the kitchen door, knocked on the door, and my hair was down, I'd run for the fridge to hide my hair because I was taught that it was a modesty issue, which I totally don't believe. I think it's our glory, it's given to us for a covering, and our long hair is really a glory to us. There's a reason women care about their hair. Um,
Hmm.
Anyway, all of those changes, but it was doable. It was a culture shock for me, but it was doable until I um, discovered this deep underlying, almost like desire in my husband for other women. And I didn't understand because it wasn't like we weren't having sex, you know. Um, so it was devastating, but because of the mental silence I was raised in and locked up in with my husband, I obeyed him when he wanted me to move on in our marriage and be quiet about it. I just remember feeling like a deep anguish and a deep silence and a very deep grief come over me as I tried to be the best wife and mom I could be. So I gave birth to our fourth baby, and things just went from bad to worse. It went from porn to, you know, flirting with actual girls, or, lots of friendships with girls where I was told to stay off his phone. And I lived with an angst, and I want to speak into this for women. I have become aware that, talk of potentially open marriage or swinging or whatever is actually far more common than we would think.
Mm-hmm.
There are now groups of Christians embracing this lifestyle, and there are couples peppered everywhere living this lifestyle. And so I had a girl meet me from another state a few years ago, and she wanted to meet me to talk about this, and it was heartbreaking.
Wow. Wow.
I was able to take a stand to my husband and say never. She agreed to it. It tore her up. And then she was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want you to do it. At that point, he wouldn't get rid of the other girl, and it just tore her up. And she couldn't bring herself to divorce him. She couldn't, nothing. She was stuck and locked in. And my heart breaks for these women. And I want them to know, number one, they're not alone. This is a pervasive problem. It's creeping into the church in the same way the humanistic mindset for our own happiness above the will of God is creeping into the church and causing a ton of women to divorce their husbands now because
Mm-hmm.
they're no longer happy, or they label him emotionally abusive or narcissistic when he's not. He has some problems, but he's not divorce worthy. And there's a ton of women now divorcing good-hearted men with problems like we all have, and that is heartbreaking. On the other side, there's now a lot of men looking into this polygamous mindset, basing it off the Old Testament, trying to sweep their wives into that kind of a lifestyle. And I'm just here to say, women, speak up and go for help, and don't quietly carry this out of embarrassment or shame. Like, it's not your fault. Um, and you're not alone, and you really need to reach out. I should have gone to the pastors of my church so much sooner. Um,
Do you feel at the time, did you feel like you could trust them because here was your husband and he was a minister? Were you con were you concerned about trust at that time?
no, I wasn't, not with them. My husband was actually a state trooper and a SWAT officer at that time.
Mm,
He had opportunity to become a pastor, but he turned it down and went to the law enforcement world
okay.
instead. Um, so I carried a lot of anguish mentally and emotionally, but it did cause me to go really deep with the Lord. And in time, I found my voice and I reached out for therapy. And I remember I booked a session with a man because I wanted to know if what my husband said was true, that I was too jealous, it was weird, the way he could crush me and
Hmm.
then turn it on me, and I absorbed it. And I would apologize for anything and everything, and like scrutinize myself and try to come up with something that would let me apologize so that he would then be okay and love me and come my way, that
Yeah.
kind of a mess. And just the continual sex, no matter how much my heart was hurting, so that he would have no reason to go to other women or look at porn. And that didn't work either. And so I'm here to say that to women as well. It's not your fault. you know
Yeah.
I really I really hold dear the sexual aspect of a marriage. It's so important, as you know.
Hmm.
It's wrong for either spouse to defraud the other. What's not wrong is for a wife going through that kind of thing to say, I need a break until we figure this out because I'm being torn up, you know, like I'm
Yes.
not doing well emotionally. And at that point, you're not responsible to hold your marriage together. you're responsible to be healthy, to find your value, to maintain your dignity. You know, I've had women say, do I need to sleep with my husband when I know he's sleeping with another girl? I'm like, no, like you really, really don't. So, but I never, you know, he never, as far as I know, he never lived it out except for pornography.
Mm.
It was just this underlying angst of an unsettled thing um,
Mm-hmm.
that I was carrying. And, you know, him making comments like, see, isn't that impressive? Like one man seated at a table with three beautiful women, you know,
Mm.
and I would just want to choke on my food, but I wouldn't say much because I wanted him to enjoy his date with me. You know, that idolization of the man you're married to, it has to stop. There's a thing called respect, but there has to be mutual respect. There's a thing called leadership, but it's servant leadership. And then there's a beautiful thing called friendship in a marriage where you honor each other and you don't dare dishonor the other because you love each other. You know, just like I don't go dishonor my best friend, my closest girlfriend, I go all out to create a beautiful friendship with her. That's how marriage should be. Um, and a lot of the ladies where I'm from, they're just not taught that and they're not experiencing that. And it creates a lot of problems, a lot of mental and sometimes even physical problems. But I'm very thankful for my upbringing. I have wonderful parents, but I had a terrible marriage. And when he finally left, I thought I was going to die, but I didn't. The Lord helped me with 4 children to move over here. That was after he was with the 16-year-old girl. And I just started over on the East Coast, and here I am.
Wow. Wow. And we don't need to get deep into that, but you just you mentioned a 16-year-old girl that he was involved with after.
Yes, in our marriage, mm, our oldest daughter had a friend who was over
Mm-hmm.
at the house a lot, and she was 15 at the time. So they were definitely bonding, connecting, and I was very uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very much afraid of my husband, afraid of his anger. And so most of the time I was locking in and locking down because I didn't want to face his anger if I talked to him about things. His anger, or maybe 2 or 3 hours of just a brain twisting, difficult conversation that left me with so much pressure in my head and no answers. You know, to this day, I can have a really hard time with maybe conversations where there's like a dialogue or a debate over one thing for 2 or 3 hours because it's just like it's too much because of that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there sounds like there was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse. Was there ever any physical abuse?
No, no, he never hit me.
Mm-hmm.
He may as well have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, exact. I mean, the emotional abuse and verbal abuse is, yeah, I'm not saying that one is worse or better than the other, but it's impactful. Absolutely. So the
Yeah,
fear that you had was real.
yeah, it really was. And just the mental pressure of trying, because of how I was raised to honor my husband,
Mm-hmm.
I spent so many years trying to justify what he was doing. And because he knew that's what I was doing, and I was very
Mm-hmm.
gullible and he could talk me into a lot, he would put that on me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, another lady wouldn't be bothered by this. And then I would go and ask my friends, hey, if your husband did this, would that bother you? And they'd be like, absolutely. And then, you know, tell him that, oh, you just didn't portray the situation right. You know, it was
Yeah.
just, oh, or like, it's hard to want to be trustworthy if you don't trust me. And I would just sit there like speechless, like, I don't know how to trust you. Like you're breaking my heart, you know?
Wow.
And so I did, I internalized all of it. By the time I went to therapy, I really don't feel like my brain had ever been healthy my entire life. So by the
Hmm.
time I went to therapy, I was a silent woman performing on the outside. Everybody thought I was an amazing wife, wonderful wife, because I was doing what a lot of women don't do, right? Packing his lunch, ironing his uniform, giving him back massages, homeschooling my kids, keeping the house spotless, doing the yard work. I mean, I did it all. Stay
Mm.
at home. They were my world, him and the kids. And I wanted it that way. But what I didn't know, like I look back and I'm like, I can't even believe who I used to be. Like,
Hmm.
where was I? And then I'm like, I was buried under fear, so much fear.
Hmm.
So I went for therapy, and in the first 5 minutes, I started crying and I didn't stop for an hour. And he just said, I went to an older Christian man that was well known in the community because I wanted to know if I was crazy.
Hmm.
Um, but it took like 5 minutes, and he was like, are you sure this is the man you want to grow old with?
Yeah.
And I almost never went back because I wasn't about to divorce. I'd been taught that was very wrong. And even after my husband, started attaching himself to the 15-year-old girl, uh, he had told me, he's like, I've decided I don't want other women as long as I'm with you, but after the divorce, I'm not sure, if I'll
Mm.
just have a pleasurable life or not. And I just remember listening to him and feeling like I was going to die. And I just sat down on a bench and I was like speechless. I didn't know what to say. I'm like, what did I just hear? It was just so weird to me,
Yeah. Yeah.
The book he wanted me to study with him was called Liberating Sex, written by a man who changed his name because he wanted to be anonymous, but literally a Christian man, pastor, I believe, maybe former pastor, who takes scripture and turns it into a justification for basically almost any kind of sex within the context of a Christian marriage, except for rape and incest.
Mm.
So I could sleep with other men, he could sleep with other women. And dear knows what all we could do,
Mm.
And he wanted me to study this book with him, and because I wanted his favor, and I was made to feel like I was rigid and not open-minded enough. So I didn't love the truth enough if I wasn't able to take this topic by the horns and study it out with an open mind. And so I was walking around doing all of my household and children and homeschooling, wondering if I was being selfish. And I
Yeah.
had some competition. My best friend was willing to study this topic out with our husbands.
Really?
So, yes. So
Mm.
I was devastated. I was very insecure. And so I told him, okay, I'll study it out with you. So he ordered the book. It came in the mail. I read one page and I closed it, and I was sick to my stomach. And I said, I can't read this. I can't do this. Please get it out of the house. The book disappeared and I never knew what happened to it, but that's how I operated. I went silent,
Yeah.
but I was going out to therapy and opening up to a few people. I would call my dad at 2 in the morning and just cry my eyes out.
Mm.
Because I just felt so helpless in my marriage. There was nothing I could do, nothing I could do. So I kept trying to go back to winning his favor. Like, he'll think I'm awesome if I do what he wants me to do. And he did. If I did what he wanted me to do, he thought I was amazing. So that's what I tried to do. So the book disappeared until he packed his bags and walked out the door. And then for some odd reason, he left it laying on the couch with another book. And that book was on top,
Mm.
laying in broad daylight. And I picked it up and I'm like, there's that book. And I
Wow.
couldn't believe it. And I called one of my mentors and I told her, I said, I want to burn this book, but I'm afraid to do it. And she said, go burn the book. So I did. I went outside and I held a torch to those pages and it
Hmm.
felt so good. And
Was
he
it,
came.
I mean, when you burned that book and he walked out, you were sad that he walked out, but was that, liberating sex was the name of the book, but did that liberate you?
Burning it liberated me. Him
Hmm.
walking out did not.
Yeah.
At that point, I was so devastated. I was like, I'm married to this man for life. You know,
Hmm.
I'm not just going to easily remarry. Obviously, here I am 6 years later. I'm still single. Oh, not big. I mean, I would love to remarry the right person someday, but I'm looking for something specific and
Hmm.
it's hard to find. So,
That certainly can be. Well, we're going
yeah.
to continue this. We're going to continue talking about this in part two of our conversation with Sara Daigle. Stay tuned.